Good evening. Welcome into the Inquirer podcast. It is Jeremy Werner and Derek Piper joins me live from Lincoln. I'm back at Illinois. It's after dark, 11 o'clock here Central Time, as we have to react to an 80-74 loss for Illinois at Nebraska. Michael Tulip said earlier in the week, it's about how you play midweek in Lincoln. That kind of determines seasons right there. And boy, that was a pretty ugly one. 10 of 42 from three for Illinois, 17 turnovers. Derek Piper, I'll just start off right here. Is that the worst loss of the season for Illinois?
That's a good question. The fact that we got to pause there and consider tells you that you've had some tough ones. The USC might end up being a quad three at the end of the day. Yes, without KJ, but double-digit loss at home is hard to wrestle with. I at least respect that this building has been tougher to win at. No, it's not last year where they reeled off all 10 of their games at home in Big Ten play as wins, but it's now 19-6 over the last 3 years in Big Ten home games. So, but I am maybe burying the lead. I think eye test wise that was the worst. Eye test wise that was a terrible effort. Not playing with enough grit and edge, continuing to chuck threes against a team that's been getting absolutely torched from beyond the arc, and they had the looks to be able to do that to this squad. And then I think the offense just looked broken a lot of possessions. Like so many ISO ball, step back threes. I thought I was living back in the Matthew Meyer, Terrence Shannon of 22-23 team. Like that's something that they did a ton of, and that was a lot of what their offensive possessions ended as. So USC was bad, but Maryland at that extent, Maryland was embarrassing at that level of loss. 21 points in your home court as a row. Only 5 times that's happened in 50 years, but this one was pretty ugly too. Pretty ugly.
Yeah, I would argue this is the worst because I just don't think Nebraska's very good. I didn't think Nebraska played all that well. Bryce Williams, kudos to him. He was kind of that steady guy that Illinois just didn't have tonight. But Bryce made some big shots, obviously, in that overtime period. I think he's an all Big Ten player. But the rest of that roster is not very good. So Juwan Gary, tough player. I just didn't even think they played all that well, and they gave you so many opportunities to win it. So for me, that's one of the most disappointing, just because even though you're not whole, and we'll get into that, like you're still better than that Nebraska team talent-wise. So a lot had to go wrong here. And one thing that we got to be concerned about at this point, we knew Nebraska was going to allow Illinois to chuck up all these threes. It's what they do. They've given up 81 threes over the last 6 games. I think you said 41% clip, Derek. Like this is what they allow. And I didn't mind Illinois taking them. They just couldn't make them. 10 of 42 in this game. Illinois now 28.6% from 3 during Big Ten play. That's gross. And I went back, and some of the players here, like Kylan Boswell is like a 34% three-point shooter, better than that, right, in his career. 25% during Big Ten play. I know Will Riley played well tonight, 21% during Big Ten play. Trey White, 17% during Big Ten play. Dre Gibbs-Allhorn played well tonight, 29% during Big Ten play. Benham Rickhouse, terrible, 0-7 tonight, 31% during Big Ten play. The one player who's been good is Kasper Siakashonis at 37.5%. Derek, this isn't a very good three-point shooting team right now.
Yeah, no, apologies. I got a country concert breaking out here at Pinnacle Bank Arena as their players going through a workout. But yeah, there's a big enough sample size now. You're more than halfway through with Big Ten play, where it's not an outlier. The outlier really in the month of January is going on the road at Oregon and making 16 of them. Everything else since then, 8 games of a stretch where they're 25% as a team over the last 8 games from 3. And they're taking, on average, about 31 attempts from deep. So not only are you a poor three-point shooting team, you are relying on that a ton. So that's one characteristic that is parallel to that 22-23 season, is that team too took a bunch of threes, and they were one of the worst teams in high major level of shooting from beyond the arc. I'm curious. I got the KenPom ahead of me right now. I mean, season is 283rd.
Yeah, it's bad. Look that stuff up, Derek. I just want to bring it up. This team is starting to feel more like that team, right? In that it is so reliant on that team was Matthew Meyer heater or Terrence Shannon heater. This one feels like now it's Kasparis or Will Riley. now. It feels like you're relying on these freshmen who are naturally going to be a little bit inconsistent. It's starting to feel more like that team with the inconsistency. And listen, they are far better with Tomislav Vesic. I'll point out a problem about that here a little bit later, but we could talk about the ceiling, and they have some good wins this year, but that 22-23 team had some of the best wins in the country, but then they'd lose to somebody like USC or they'd lose to somebody like Nebraska. It's like this team could be one and done in the NCAA tournament with this kind of inconsistency, really on both ends of the court right now, because I don't even think they're playing. They played well defensively against Northwestern, but I kind of felt like this was a tough team, physical team defensively. And just because you lose Tomislav Vesic doesn't mean you should lose that too. So it's alarming.
It definitely is. I asked Brad in the post game about 3-point shooting. He then took a shot at my personal abilities from the arc. I don't need to harp on that too much. I didn't play D1 basketball for a reason, so certainly some limitations there. But he talked about it's no secret we aren't a very good post-up team. And without Tommy, that does limit them offensively as well. They do, to what you're saying, they got to navigate this reality of who they are without Tommy. Like, we don't know when that is returning for them. When he does return, what's his capabilities going to be? How long does it take for him to play well? So I think that's something they got to be able to figure out. There are certain guys where feeding Trey White on a corner three is death to a possession for the most part. I mean, I'm not saying he can't ever make one, but the percentages say that's a terrible shot. Kylan Boswell on a step-back three, especially with time left on the shot clock, really, really poor. So there are some things they got to do shot selection-wise to clean some of this up. Otherwise, I mean, you got to ride it out. Let Will take his shots, get Ben his shots. Ben missed some that he'll make. I don't know that we can say on most nights now because he's
wide open shots. I mean, you tell me, like, the biggest thing about this game, like, the turnovers are bad. The defensive lapses, especially at the end of that first half where Bryce gets too easy, but they were bad. But just make open shots. Like, you need to make 35%, 40% of those open looks that Caspers is getting.
No doubt. Yeah. And the problem is that it's not, hey, those shots go in on most nights. They're not right now. It is very inconsistent. And it's a team that the consistency is that they don't shoot 30% from three on most nights. So that's something where there's still a lot of time left in the season. There are quality shot makers on this team. KJ can set guys up. That you can't have the ink dry on what this is in terms of an offense and three-point shooting and everything like that. But you hope that you're not wrong in your evaluation and that you didn't overestimate the three-point shooting capabilities of a group, build your offense around a really prolific playmaker and shooting, and the shooting falls completely flat. Like, this was supposed to be, again, like Brad even said in November and leading into the year, like kind of last year's Bama, the volume of threes, the NBA style, all of that kind of stuff. Like, that's not working at all. And they don't obviously have a big counter. They're not really built to do a whole lot else. They're not going to throw the ball to Perez 15 times on the block like it's Kofi. Ben can play a little bit of booty ball, but tonight he couldn't do anything.
It hasn't been efficient lately, Derek. It hasn't been efficient.
You're right. And too many possessions. KJ's going into a step back, which he can make a couple of those. Will doing his thing, which was great for a stretch of 13 in a row in the second half. But again, I think it's a hard thing for Brad right now where I asked, volume. He says same thing. Keep shooting them, getting good looks, all that. We got to ride this out. I don't know. I don't know what the pivot is and how much can your other things be good enough. You just have to try to see your way through this because the other methods aren't something that is going to pay a big enough dividend.
Yeah, I think some guys might not have a red light now, but some of these guys should probably start getting a yellow light. Like, Kylan's got to stop with these early in the possession. You just got to stop. Like those can't happen. You're not a good enough shooter right now to do it. And, I was kind of texting back and forth with Michael Tulip, and he's saying these guys aren't shooting to make shots. They're just shooting to get it on the rim. And Brad, he told you guys after this game, you get threes, you get a bunch of offensive rebounds. Well, they still didn't turn those offensive rebounds into a huge amount of points. They had 20 offensive rebounds. in this game, 15 second chance points that kind of floated them in the first half as they were struggling to get any points, but that's still not a great conversion rate right there. And you're just missing 32 shots. And a lot of those turn into Nebraska possession. So I think some of these guys got to start getting yellow light. Casper's going to have the green light whenever the hell he wants. Will Riley, I'm getting more and more comfortable with him because they need somebody who can score and score in bunches. And he did that. I do think Dre is not a great 3-point shooter, but boy, I like him confident. And that was a bright spot today is when Will Riley and Dre Gibbs-Allhorn combined for 31 points in this one. Ben, well, let's bring it up. He's struggling. The inconsistency shooting there, he just does not look confident. But when he's in the game, he does have to shoot threes. Otherwise, there's no point of playing him. But let's talk about that last possession, Derek, because end of game situations for this team have been a huge struggle. And it was again tonight. And I looked, and when I saw Ben come off the bench for Dre, who had just hit a big three, and I think Dre was a better offensive rebounder and has been, it feels like, here recently, and a guy who can get to the rim if you have to. That was a questionable decision. Now, the ball, the problem with that possession is you didn't have enough time to run anything, and you get inbounds play, and sideline out of bounds continues to be the bane of this team's existence. And you just get Will in the corner, and boy, that almost went in. Like it was a good matchup against Hoiberg. He was able to get the ball up and get it on the rim, and it almost went in, but I got to get KJ the ball. I got to get KJ the ball with the decision because that guy can make something happen. And that's not what you want late in the game when you got a chance to steal a victory there. So what did you think of that?
Yeah, I credit Joey Wagner for asking the question in the post game to Brad about the substitution of Ben coming in and DGL coming off. And DGL just hit that cold-blooded corner three, and if nothing else, that dude's fearless. Yeah, that dude's absolutely fearless. High degree of confidence, aggression, and everything. So, big reason him and Will why you got back into that basketball game. Made a three at the 4-minute mark, and another one with 50-some seconds left, or whatever it was, under a minute, obviously. And I think it was a mistake. And Brad said that we put Ben out there as a floor spacer, trying to open things up and everything, but
Dre felt like a floor spacer at that point more than Ben.
Yeah, a floor spacer, a slasher, an offensive rebound threat, like a guy that was going to sky for a rebound if you got a chance at it. So I didn't agree with that decision. A lot of people obviously have made it vocal that they didn't either. I asked Will about the shot and that play, and the fact that it wasn't some kind of here's what I'm supposed to do coming off and having options. He's like, hey, I just kind of, I kind of caught it at the corner and I put up a good shot, put up my best effort, and that was that. Sideline out of bounds have been horrible.
And let's be honest,
guarding baseline out of bounds tonight too, which is another thing. But
Fred Hoiberg won the coaching battle today. You think of the slob plays, the baseline out of bounds plays, they scored on him. You think of those set plays at the end of the half, first half, huge. And then to get Bryce Williams some of those looks late in the game, I just thought the coaching advantage was with Fredson.
Hard to argue with for sure. Yeah, Brad was not able to find answers. Illinois just was so fortunate Nebraska did not make enough plays offensively to slam the door shut when they should have. They had no business winning a game like this on the road, turning the ball over as many times as they did, shooting as poorly as they did from three. And then, you come out in overtime, and Ben, who was bad the whole night, takes the first two shots in overtime, and you continue to settle for threes. You couldn't get away from ISO ball. Brad seemed to be struggling with, which it is when you're so invested in KJ unlocking things offensively and you don't trust Kylan on the ball, which I know we're going to talk more about, that you can't really hold KJ as accountable with a hook. Like KJ has a 6 turnover. Do I pull him? Do I let him still play? And I don't think that's necessarily Brad's fault. That's just the reality of the situation with your roster. So, but to your original point, Illinois got outplayed, outcoached, all of it on the road tonight.
We heard a little feisty Brad in the post-game press conference. I liked it. I want to see more of it. And I want to see more of it with his players. He did have his hand wrapped. I don't know if you guys saw it, but his hand was wrapped after the game. I'm wondering if you heard his hand doing something. So we'll have to follow up with Brad after that. I think it's time to get after these guys. And I think it's time, Derek, to maybe have to make some decisions here of who do you trust more right now? Dre Gibbs-Allhorn or Kylan Boswell? Like, ride with Dre a little bit more. Give him some more of the playing time. Go smaller if you need to. And if Ben Humrickhouse is not going to be confident or he had 7 rebounds tonight and 2 blocks, so I'll give him that. But if he's not going to be making shots for you, then maybe you got to go somebody else. You got to change it up a little bit. So I think it's time to stop giving any excuses about this team not being whole and just get into these guys a little bit because they're not living up to their potential right now. And that's on a coach to do. So I'd like to see feisty 2019, 2018 Brad a little bit more here right now, Derek, because this is a big moment. I mean, you've lost 4 of 6 games. I know you're battling adversity right now. I don't think this team is handling adversity well right now.
I agree with that. And I think that you do worry about floating too many excuses out that then kind of soften the accountability and then just the way your mentality is as a team. It should be a team that talk about edge. There's got to be you got to be able to have a hardened exterior and a guy's going to hold people accountable and use the bench and all that kind of thing. Part of Brad's strength as a motivator and as a guy that toughens his team is that he does have his explosive Brad moments. I don't fully, and Joey and I were talking about this after the game, and we mentioned after Northwestern game that the day before, long practice, grinding on the guys, you hear him out in the hallway. I think Brad is different behind the scenes than he is in front of the microphone right now. We're seeing some signs of the frustration spilling out. And one of my theories is that I think he's harping so heavy. Now, you got to be careful to toe the right line here and not give your players too many excuses. I think he's harping heavy on it because I think he wants the NCAA committee to hear this. He wants to put out the vibe that we're not whole here. So when we lose 4 of 6, when we go through the lumps that we're going to take, evaluate that when our seeding line comes out. I don't know if it'll work. That's my theory. I feel like that's part of his mission right now.
I get it, but I think that also gets to the players. Like, it's okay.
Yeah, and I'm not saying it's
okay. It's okay to go to Nebraska and lose. It's okay to lose to USC at home. It's okay to lose by 21 to Maryland. That shouldn't be happening. So I get that. That's a decent theory, but I also think when you speak at a press conference, your players hear that, people around them hear that. It's like, oh, it's okay, man. I'd be getting after it a little bit more in those pressers. Yeah, I'd be sending a message.
For sure. And I think you're also trying to evaluate, how is this team going to handle me, blow torching them and whether they need that right now. I think that off of Maryland, and we talked about it, if they weren't battling the sickness they were battling, and I don't want to make, again, you're wrapping in excuses, lose by 21 at home to Maryland. I don't care if your center's out. That shouldn't happen at that extent. But I wondered if that was part of holding Brad back for, lighting it all on fire type of thing. And maybe he learned some from 22-23 when he did the Terrence fart noise and things just snowballed as
the vibes were off after that. Yeah.
More of their issues got public and more of the friction inside or just downfalls of that team and the leadership became more and more public. And I'm not saying that was the reason why the thing came apart at the seams. So I don't know if he's thinking about that at all as well. But I'm with you that it's time to rip some of the Band-Aid off. And the team, and he did say tonight about turnovers, it's time to grow up. And I think just in general, that's a message that needs to be re-emphasized to this team. It's February. It's going to be February next time you take the court. It's time to be who you're supposed to be, not who you can be down the road.
All right. Well, one more thing I want to hit on before we get to some of these super chats. I don't want to hear the need to be whole a lot more. Listen, we can understand. Tomislav Visic is the second most valuable player on this team, and he is very important. They are far better when he is on the court. But Brad also chose Kerry Booth, who is not playing really and not making an impact when he's out there, rather than another playable big right now. So when Merez gets in foul trouble, you have no other choice. Ben Humrickhouse has to play. You need some length in there. And Ben, to his credit, had 7 rebounds and 2 blocks tonight. But you could use another playable big right now rather than somebody who played at Notre Dame last year, started games, and isn't making an impact because he's more of a stretch big. You could use a guy who could just go in there and be Matthew Nicholson, right? Or just kind of bully some people around. that's looking like a miss right now. I mean, they hit at some big ones this offseason, but they could use another big right now. So that's part of it is everyone's kind of dealing with injuries at this point. You're kind of seeing it every game. This guy's out. This guy's out. Like Rutgers obviously is going through it right now too. But yeah, I just think that's part of it is you could have used another big and you kind of went all in on these stretch guys along with Mraz.
Yeah, Carey is not nearly what they thought he could be. And it did take him with an idea that he'd be the payoff was more so to be had in year 2 than year 1. But that he would be a playable stretch 4 rotational big in the first year because he played 20 minutes a game in Notre Dame last year in the ACC, and he's not ready, or whatever it is. Excuse me.
Yeah, he's just not. You can't play him. Like when he gets on the court, he gets attacked. There's a really bad shot attempt he took earlier too. Like
you just didn't have confidence, right? And I don't know why I'm getting choked up. It must be the song. Luke Bryan gets to me right in my heart. But yeah, that they are thin up front, especially obviously with Tommy. But you were never going to be able to keep Dane and as a third big, but some kind of piece that could help you there. You're really short on playmaking guards, right? Kylan not being that, at least in terms of where he's at right now, you do not want him running a lot of offense. It's just the reality of it. Turnovers have been really, really poor. Dre is not a pure point. That's not either. So when KJ's struggling, but there's no doubt about the front court and Perez dipping into that foul trouble. I mean, 2 by the first media, another one in the second half real early. That's a lot of pressure on him. So yeah, certainly there's some roster construct that are popping up too.
All right, before the concert wraps up there at Pinnacle Bank, let's get to some of these super chats. We got a few of them. War Chant, $5 super chat. Thank you, War Chant. What was Brad's excuse for subbing DGL for Ben? 0 of 8 compared to 5 of 10 shooting isn't mathing for me. So go ahead, Derek. What do you have to say? You basically just said that Ben is a gravity guy, is what he called him. But as we talked about, like it felt like DGL was more gravity than Ben at that point.
Gravity guy, floor spacer is really what he landed on ultimately. And Dre just hit big shots down the stretch and was a big part of that comeback. So Dre was one of the guys we got after the game, and he's frustrated. I'm not saying that like tying this all to being subbed out, but that can't be easy for a player to have helped your team get in that position and then be subbed out there, where Ben really wasn't giving you anything at all. So Brad was asked about it by Joey, and yeah, he kind of just said floor spacer. Gravity.
Yeah. Victor, $5 super chat. Why does Coach Underwood love Ben Hummerkow so much? He gets the first 2 shots in OT. Again, it's a little bit of roster construction too. He's 6'9". Mraz was hurt. He played 25 minutes tonight out of 45. So it's not a ridiculous amount, right? But he was 0 of 8 shooting. And that's the problem. But who's your other 4s? Kerry Booth can't play. So it's Trey White and Jake Davis right now. So it's kind of another roster construction problem is, Ben hasn't been as good as I thought he would be. I thought he was a great addition. He's still one of your best 3-point shooters right now, by the way. He is rebounding more. I think his defense has actually been pretty good here during Big Ten play. But his value is making shots, and it's just been so inconsistent. He makes 5 against Penn State, 3 against USC. Then he makes 2 over the next 3 games, 4 against Northwestern, phenomenal, and then 0 of 7 tonight. So it's just that inconsistency hurts. You just don't have any other options really to go to there, Derek.
For sure. Yeah. I thought that he would be like a 40% 3-point shooter beyond the arc. A guy that would consistently give you, he make 3 threes a night, essentially, as a kind of a baseline of what you expect. And yes, can pop up and make 5 and have those type of heater type of nights. You can't really excuse a lot of it. I think there have been games where he's found it tough to get free, and that's on the staff where he needs to maybe have some plays to come off screens and get freed up. Tonight he did have plenty of clean looks that he just didn't make. So that's really on him to make it or not. And yeah, I mean the 4 spot. Trey's been a guy that's left a decent amount to be desired here recently, kind of disappearing at times. And Jake did not have a very good game tonight, ultimately either. So hurting you because Ben was supposed to be a real focal point, and he can be when he's making. He just made 4 against Northwestern, but just been way too up and down with that.
All right, Austin Cotter, $4.99 super chat. Thank you, Austin. DGL and Riley, big part of the comeback in the second half. I love to see Riley get going again. His heaters, man. Like, listen, Kasparis had the 6 turnovers that really hurt you because it led to 9 points for Nebraska. But boy, that guy, you're just so reliant on him. So it is nice, Derek, to have another guy who can just get going and carry the offense and take a little bit off Kasparis for a while. It's inconsistent with Will. He makes like 6 shots in a row and then he'll struggle for the rest of the game. But yeah, like with him and DGL, at some points, it's like, how much more playing time those guys need to eat into with Trey and Kylan, because those veteran transfers aren't giving you the consistency you need. These freshmen, you can deal with some of the ups and downs of it, the turnovers that happen, but at least like they're confident. Like that's what I like seeing out of Will right now. Is he looks really confident, and DGL has really never lacked for it.
Yeah, that is a big development for Will to go into February, and it really had 2 performances also on the road, which is always tough for a freshman, that he can maybe elevate his confidence, elevate just the groove that he's feeling like he can get into. Like that should feel like what Will was. That looked like, again, a glimpse of who Will Riley was as a prospect, who he was in AAU. And it's been hard for him to transfer that over into higher level of basketball, but yeah, he can just get buckets. That can be a real X factor for this team, and his aggressiveness is great. And I think that whenever Tommy gets back, I loved that flash of the Michigan State game, him as a cutter from the perimeter and going to the rim. I know we've had super chats about that, people comment about that, and we'll get to it, about some of the X's and O's fixes. And off-ball movement needs to be addressed. And I think that Will's a guy that can do that. Trey's a guy that can do that. And DGL I just love his makeup. I think
we'll roll with him right now, right? Like there's a toughness to him, a fearlessness.
Yes.
I see some fear from some other guys right now, and I don't see it with DGL.
He's a go-to-war guy. He's a guy that he's going to battle you possession after possession. He's tough as heck. I can live with some of his mistakes because and really, I mean, is he making any more than Kylan? He's making less.
He had 2 turnovers tonight, but he scored 16 points, right?
Yeah, right. So I like him going to the rim. He made some tough shots around the basket, some drives and finishes over people, and obviously stepping up and making big threes. I want to see him get more and more opportunity and I think there's a chance, and he talked about it after tonight, is like, I'm trying to be a leader, but I'm bringing my energy, and it's frustrating. And I know it's not all about energy; it's execution, it's making shots. But there's just an edge about him that's been consistent, where Brad felt like they got their edge back against Northwestern. It didn't carry itself over, and on the whole, it's not been there as a calling card for this team here recently.
I think you got to reward that right now for him. So I think more minutes is needed there. Fedigator, fearless prediction time. With how this team is playing right now, what is Illinois' record in the last 10 games of the season? Well, they're 6-5, so they got 9 more games. Or yeah, Duke too. So 10 games left in the season. Split them. That's what I would do. I think this team's talented enough that they're going to win games. They're going to make the NCAA tournament. Maybe it's a 7, 8, or 9 seed now, Derek. But like, I still think this team's too talented not to win several more games here. But Purdue's better than you. Duke is obviously better than you. Ohio State's a tough one on Sunday. They are a hungry team looking for a quad 1 win. You are a quad 1 win for everybody based on these metrics. So you're going to get the best shot from a lot of these teams. Michigan State's better than you, right? So like, but I still think you're going to find some ways to win this. You got to beat Rutgers and Minnesota on the road next week. You got to go find a way to win those games.
You do. Yeah, we're past the point of counting too many should-be wins. Like Iowa at home, when you play them in Champaign, they've been awful away from Hawkeye Arena, and just in general, it's not a very good team. Minnesota, you're better than, but the barn has been tough. Obviously, the rack is
Slayers, yeah.
The rack is the rack, and Ace Bailey when he's going off. Yeah, I think about 50-50 is probably the way to go. Duke, that's a whale of a matchup, obviously. But then again, I still trust that this team could pop up. Could they beat Michigan State in a game? Could they beat Purdue in a game? Could they beat Michigan in a game? Yes to all of those. But I do think we'll still see this team have inconsistency. Yep. And right now, though, you do worry about it getting on track because Tommy is a very big piece, and just in general where they're at right now, you're not having the confidence that you did a couple weeks ago.
Yeah, I mean, going into that USC game, 12-3, 4-1, 14-7, 6-5. Like you think a Big Ten championship, you're thinking 2 seed, 3 seed, something like that. That's definitely out of the cards for this team. Cubs fans 7. Seems like this team, what this team needs is X's and O's offensively, not just motivation. Talk about toughness and fighting in a parking lot. It's not enough for sure. But we were talking about, Derek, I don't know how many answers they have right now without making 3-point shots, right? Like that's what this team was built to do. And outside of Dre, and maybe Trey at times, who can get to the rim and finish? Merez, if you can find a way to get him the ball and keep him on the court. Keeping him on the court is the most important thing right now.
Yeah. I do like that against Northwestern, Kylan drew 7 fouls and made all 3 of his shots at the basket, but of course the sample size across the season says 50% at the rim guy is not that efficient. I still think that I would 100 times out of 100 rather see him put his shoulder into somebody and try to draw contact, try to finish aggressively at the basket than shoot a step back 3. Any kind of off the dribble pull up jump shot. I mean, talk about synergy numbers. I mean, he's like a 25% shooter on jumpers this entire season.
This is a great thing we have not brought up. They are not getting the foul line enough.
Yeah.
Right. 12 of 18 tonight. Like that's a problem. Only making 12. You make one more in regulation, you have a chance to win the game. But 18 free throw. We talked about that in the offseason. Like what Terrence Shannon, what they might miss the most is just the free throws. The 12 free throw attempts you got a game.
Yeah. No, I know that's something that when you thought about the sheer number that Terrence got to the rim, 200 plus, whatever, or something crazy, whatever the final number last year was.
Yeah, they're 17th in the Big Ten in free throw attempts to field goal attempt ratio. So it's a huge issue.
Yeah, it definitely is. I think in terms of like overhauling your identity of what you're going to try to be is probably unrealistic, but there are ways to get X's and O's wise better results. Like, can you draw up maybe there's not a lot of dictated set action. It's ball screen continuity. It's 2-man action. It's 2-man and 3 around standing around. And I think a lot of people's complaints is that you don't have, and it's on the players to make these plays too. It's not like, Brad saying don't ever see a seam and cut. Like Quincy Guerrier was really good at that last year. Trey White has done it at times this year, but there's not enough off-ball stuff to make up for when just the pick and roll and spray it out is your main source of offense. So can you get guys on cuts to the basket, coming off screens, those type of things? And I think I've said this a handful of times recently. I think transition, if you're not that great of a half-court team, now you got to get more stops than maybe you did tonight. But I thought this team was going to run a lot more and be a lot more potent in the open court. And that just hasn't been them. And I got guys that can do it.
Yeah, the 3 guys who really benefit from that. I think one is Kylan's good at pushing it in transition. He hasn't really done it a lot lately. Key is for him to get rebounds. He only had 4 rebounds tonight, which is low for him. Ben Humrickhouse, transition 3s usually work out pretty well for him, but also Trey White. Trey White gets to the rim, he finished at the rim. So I think that would really help him too. And those are 3 guys that they just need more from at this point.
I think Dre attacking the rim in transition, something he can definitely do. I think Will playing with a little bit more open space, and especially if he wants to go downhill. I think when things are a little bit more compact and established in the half-court defense, where you got the 5-man waiting for a guy to come downhill and help, and you deal with physicality. And heck, I mean, if Merez is going to be your primary 5, which he has to be, I like Merez trying to beat his guy down the floor and be that rim runner for easy points that way. So I think that's really something that they should try to tap into. And Michigan State showed us through the years, you don't have to just run off of misses. You can run off of makes. You can just flat out full steam ahead run. Maybe the amount of turnovers that we've seen against USC, that we saw against Maryland, that we saw in this game, that's something that you risk if you play too fast. But, man, I think instead of setting up in the half court and shooting threes, I think that's something that I'd rather see more. I think playing faster can almost instill in your guys like an attacking the basket type of instinct when you're playing like that.
SRQ 5150, tired of the excuses. This team should not be this bad, regardless of who's out. Team is quickly losing the fan base. I'm interested to see Sunday what this fan base does, because Ohio State's a hungry team. They got some dudes, man. Like, we know Bruce Thornton's really good. Devin Royal can be a matchup issue. Micah Parrish, a senior. John Mobley, their freshman, is really, really good. So they got some firepower there, and they've won 3 straight games. They went into Mackey and won. They went into Penn State and won, where you couldn't win last year. And what's that place called? I can't remember. The Rec Hall. Yeah. They went and won there tonight and dominated them. So, yeah, this is not going to be an easy task. Joe said Brad is doing his worst coaching job of his Illinois career this season. Sad. I mean, he's done a pretty good job, so the options are pretty limited. It'd be this or 2022, 23, and I think this team's more talented than that one. Mm-hmm. Bruce, love KJ, but he needs to stop getting sloppy with the ball. Too many unnecessary turnovers on his part that cost us. That is for sure. Like, it is part of his game that he definitely needs to improve. Just because he had 6 turnovers tonight does not mean he's a lottery pick, guys. Like, that does not mean that he's not a lottery pick. Like, he's a lottery pick. But he's got some flaws, and that would be one of them. It's just the careless ones, Derek. They're at the top of the key, and he just kind of loses the ball, and it leads to a run out. He's got to figure out he can't do that stuff.
It's a higher level of competition. Their guys don't fall for as many tricks or whatever it is, and some of them are just flat out unforced. Like, he just loses it being sloppy. Hated the one where he stops to, is he going to go up for a 3 with a guy right in his face, and he kind of up fakes the ball, and the guy just rakes it right out of his hand. Like, you've got to be smarter than that. And just, yeah, he's being a little too loose.
It's a reminder he's 18.
Yeah, right.
But otherwise, like, he carries you. Otherwise, like, it's just
100%. And that's the thing. The point I was making earlier. Like, you literally can't sub him out. No. For long stretches. You can't, when Curbelo was a freshman, and look, I know we're talking about different levels of talent and complete package of games, but just in general, like a playmaker who can really see the floor and pass, but will turn it over. When he had an off night or just threw a couple away, Curbelo was going to sit on the bench for a long stretch of time on that 2021 team. Like, you can't do that with KJ. You just
because he had 2 all Big Ten guards on that team.
Yeah, so that's the risk where you're starting to see a handful of times now that an 18-year-old as your primary focal point player, like, you're going to wear some of the tough learning lessons on the chin a little bit more. And tonight was definitely one of those. 7 turnovers against Maryland was one of those.
Yeah. Last one from Mike, $9.99 super chat. Thank you, Mike. Is this a culture issue? I do think they have a leadership issue, right? And part of that is when you have so many newcomers, right? That's part of it. It's kind of why you like Ty Rodgers coming back, because you felt like he could be that no doubt vocal leader, even if he wasn't going to be one of the best players. Like, I just saw one cutaway tonight of him in the bench, like, just really being the rah guy. And maybe we overrate that a little bit. I just still want the best players, but that's part of it. Is when you have this much turnover, it's not as natural. Like, next year, I would imagine some of these guys are going to be better leaders than they are right now, whether that's Boswell or Trey White, or they're just more comfortable, or if it's Dre, right? Just more comfortable doing those things. this team's still trying to figure out who it is and who those guys are. Casper is obviously a leader because he's the best player, but you need other guys to step up too. So listen, I think it's got a good program. I still think Brad Underwood was a pretty dang good coach, but when you're missing a player and then all of a sudden some of your players you're counting on are struggling, that's when people question the whole culture stuff there.
I think that they could be tougher. I think Brad has obviously pointed to that recently. Is there a disconnect amongst the players? I don't think that's the case. Leadership, I could see that.
2 weeks ago, like you and I were talking about, though, like this team is tougher than I thought, and then was Tommy that important to it?
Yeah,
you know what I mean?
Question.
Like this is kind of the team I expected in December, in early January, and then Tommy goes out, and all of a sudden, okay, now they lost that toughness. I don't know, like just observation, thinking off the top of my head.
No, interesting. That's a good point. I think that they've with some adversity and getting popped in the mouth a little bit, and you lose KJ for a little bit, you get tested a little bit more, and then you get schemed up more in the Big Ten, and you got a team like, each night's a different challenge. Nebraska's desperate, and you got that going against you, and all the USC, same thing. They'd been in a rough stretch as well. So, but I think that just some of the vibe, like talking to Dre, and he says, we didn't have the energy tonight, and I try to have that permeate to other guys, but I got to focus more on that and keep building on that. I thought Kylan would be more of a, and I think with this, when a guy isn't doing it with this play in terms of, weathering the storm and setting the tone, and then it's hard to do it with the other stuff. Like Kylan might be great right now in the huddles and in the locker room, but he's a guy who's supposed to help lead the charge, and he's struggling. Trey White's struggling. Guys that have been from Rick, I'm talking about older guys struggling. So there's that going on. I will say, like, and also, the 22-23 team had all their issues. It was all very public and everything. But TJ and Coleman were two of the three, were really the two, quote-unquote, leaders of that team, right? Mm-hmm. And then they come back, and they're part of a locker room last year that passed every vibe check imaginable. I don't think there's a vibe is off or sour or anything like that. Some of it is just like
play better,
not playing better, and figuring out your flaws and trying to have answers for them. And they're caught in that right now of not having all that figured out. And Tommy being out's a big one.
Yeah, they need to get him back. We'll see how quickly they can get him back, but they, in the meantime, got to figure out how to play without him. And it's certainly shown that they don't know exactly how to do that. And Merez needs to stay on the court. Like he is so valuable. He was a +8 when he was on the court. So they were a -16 when he was off the court. Like, so him staying on the court is incredibly important there because they got no one else there.
That's a really heavy burden for a freshman big man who's going to be playing a lot of physicality to handle. And just be thankful that you're not about ready to see Purdue or Michigan State again. And but obviously he handled the challenge great against Northwestern tonight. Just didn't impact you as much. Thought in the second half I liked it. I thought Illinois even if they didn't shoot great from three, might just annihilate Nebraska on the glass, which they ended up doing, and that would be the difference in the game. But they just weren't able to pull that off. But
any advantage they got from the glass, they gave up with the turnovers, right? 11 turnover margin for Nebraska. You had 16 more rebounds, so you just kind of gave it all back there.
That's a good point. Yep. But we'll see. That Ohio State game will obviously loom large, and will set talking about vibes. It will set the tone and the vibe of the fan base going forward, and can't lose that one and have people feeling too great, because it does get really tough schedule wise. Mm-hmm. Get into the meat of February.
Yeah. All right, we'll wrap up there. Derek Piper, thank you live from Lincoln. We appreciate that. He'll have plenty more from Lincoln with Joey Wagner. So Derek, drive safe back, man, and we appreciate your time, man.
Yeah, appreciate it, man. Talk to you soon.
Right. Everybody have a great night. Take care of each other. We'll talk to you next time right here on the Illini Inquirer podcast.